What I'm not going to talk about today is how to fix your credit report, being from Equifax, but we may touch on some challenges we've had over the past 12 months or so. On this first slide, it's kind of something that I'll come back to in a minute, but as global sourcing officer for BPO services, I also am heavily involved in our shared service center, so I balance in-source and outsource, as well as look at software as a service type of enablers for business process services. And we have roughly about 1,000 seats in Costa Rica, pretty heavily full of great young talent and a lot of folks that want to learn. So I'll just kind of put that as a placeholder there and move on with kind of a journey slide. So back in 2016, across Equifax, we had multiple things going on. One, most of our customer-facing applications were under transformation. All of our IT resources were consumed, and you could not find the IT bandwidth to work on process improvement for operations or for finance or for HR. And this was kind of when the peak of hype around RPA started to bubble up, and some people were talking about AI and machine learning, and some of that was hype, some not. But across Equifax, a lot of our managers were starting to play with automation and RPA specifically, some of them more advanced types. And even in our shared service center, they had done things with macros and other things to try and save labor from doing manual tasks. And then we started playing with robotic process automation. And it became clear between myself and the leader of our shared service center that we needed an enterprise solution for automation. And we needed to start in a place that we could manage, which was in the RPA space. And a lot of that logically is in your back office. It can be an HR back office or finance or your operations centers. We have thousands of employees around the world, both third party and internal, doing call centers, back office, document services, data entry, all those traditional kinds of things. And each of those processes is ripe for some type of automation. But as you get more closer to your customers, it becomes more difficult to automate. So we kind of started in the back office, started in Costa Rica. We also had some third-party providers that were doing some automation. And we came to kind of the realization that for us to be able to drive this throughout the enterprise, we needed to create a center of excellence around automation, starting on RPA. And so looking at that, this journey as depicted here, you get into the more complex things throughout time, and time in technology is shrinking because things are moving so quickly. So that's kind of the journey map of this slide. So the next thing we did was try and figure out what type of software solution best fit the opportunities that we were looking at. And we looked at all of them and played with all of them with all kinds of pilots and proof of concepts like everyone had done at the time, especially with new technology. And and we kind of landed on UiPath and put an enterprise-wide agreement in place. And you know, they're right outside, so I got to talk to some of the folks at UiPath, but they were growing, and you know, looking at their technology roadmap and their operating model and the way that they kind of went to market, best fit for where we were at. For different solutions, definitely there's different technologies, but you need to keep that in mind as you're looking at opportunities. One size doesn't necessarily fit all, but in the RPA space, UiPath worked very well for us. The other thing was we had to convince our executive leaders that a COE around automation is something we needed desperately right away. And, you know, I don't know if y'all have had this same experience, but myself and some of my colleagues knew exactly what we needed to do and expressed that desire to our leaders, but typically they want to hear it from a third party. So we also went looking for some help around consultants in the space. And we talked to a bunch of them. And because of the timing, most of them, their resources were spread thin. You'd be lucky to get on their calendar, even with a large potential project to work on. You know, it's a good thing we did some due diligence there. And it just so happened that I had had a relationship with Anupam at Avasant for some time. And they were also stepping into this space. So it became kind of perfect timing for us to work with Avasant. They've been a great help in helping us sell and stand up our automation COE as well. Help us do some work in terms of, typically if you're going to do some automation, you do an overall heat map of where your opportunities are, you do some in-depth assessments based on priorities, and then you go to work. And so they were a great help along that journey for different opportunities, and we're still working together. But it was kind of a marriage of perfect timing, and they've really brought some great thought leadership to bear. But I will, you know, kind of put a warning out there, do some due diligence on who you want to work with. Because the automation space is short on talent, and you could be working with somebody that doesn't have the resources to support you when you need it. So, you know, I just kind of put that out there. Now, Gregory.
So this is where Avasant enters the story, and as Bert just said, they had a pretty clear sense of what they wanted to do. They wanted to take this thing that called RPA, robotic process automation, that they had proofed the concept, and it was pretty clear that the technology worked, but the question was, you know, it's easy to design and deploy a robot, but the question really is, how do you build and manage a digital workforce? And that was really the challenge that not only the Center of Excellence had, but also Bert and the other leadership team across Equifax had as they began to think about how to fully capitalize on this technology. And also to make sure that as they thought about the term digital workforce, they didn't forget the fact that this is all starting with people. So the question is, how are we going to manage this, and how are we going to encourage change and advocacy in a world where people might, you know, easily think, here come the robots. And what are we going to do to overcome those challenges? Or leaders might not understand what this lever is for and not understand exactly how to get real business value and impact from it now. So if you've worked with consultants before, you know one of the things we really love is something called a roadmap. It's really important to, if you're going to go on the journey called transformation, you might want to have a map to help you figure out how to get there. So this is a picture that we developed working with the team at Equifax. And it starts where most organizations who begin the intelligent automation journey begins, which is with some sort of understanding of the technology. In this case, it was proof of concepts around RPA. And as Bert mentioned, it was happening kind of virally in different parts of Equifax. So one of the things that had to happen, as you see over here, is there were different different organizations, think of them like in a early solar system where you have different little planetesimals floating around, and all of them have an equal opportunity to sort of experiment with this technology. But when the decision was made to go with the COE, they had to start from a policy standpoint saying, guess what? There's going to be a center of gravity to this solar system. It's going to have to start pulling together the standards, the policies, the practices, and things like platform decisions. So, for example, if UiPath was going to be the enterprise platform decision for Equifax for automating RPA, then guess what? People, if they wanted to do this kind of work, had to move onto that platform. If they were going to adhere to the very important and high levels of requirements for security, they had to make sure they understood those standards and mapped to them from the very beginning. The assumption was if you could get those standards in place, then you'd have what amounts to, from a policy governance standpoint, the right outcomes for Equifax's consumer customers, for its business leaders, for its employees. However, it's not enough to simply say the Center of Excellence is going to be what amounts to a policy shop. To have credibility, to truly add value, it's got to start off being a bot factory. It's got to actually be the place where people know that when they want the work done, they can place an order for the demand and get the outcome. So in this phase of establishing, it was about taking the legacy of the facility that Bert showed you on this first slide, which is the Shared Service Center in Costa Rica, taking the legacy experience of an in-source captive service level agreement culture of providing service internally and bring that to automation. So the disciplines that you have in a shared service center of, I've got a business leader, they have a requirement, they've got work they want to bring forward to us to basically person load. Now instead of placing an order for butts and seats, they're placing an order for bots and seats.
So Greg, just to add on a bit on that, when we created a centralized center of excellence model, there's quite a bit of debate on should we have a hybrid center of excellence without a central kind of structure to it and rigor that goes with that? Should it be distributed, since we're talking about global automation, where you've got center of excellence pockets around the world? We think we'll eventually get to that more distributed model, but we wanted to first capture best practices, capture our learnings, and get the thing stood up, built in our library of information together. That does not mean that we won't have automations being championed around the world. It just means our Center of Excellence will keep an eye on things to make sure they're within the confines of what we put together.
And as you pointed out previously, Bert, this is a journey that continues. So once you've experimented with the technology and established it and put together from an enabling standpoint the competencies necessary to deliver this worldwide, guess what happens? We start innovating again. We look at the next rung on the technology ladder, and as Bert just said, the experimentation that happens in different parts of the globe become the exciting new opportunities that you have to basically institutionalize next. So that journey map is where we are currently on, and enabling this phase now is about building the competency and the culture necessary to succeed in automation, because it's not just enough to think about, again, technology. It's people who make decisions about what to automate, and it's people you engage with, teams who own process today who have to help you automate it. So what happens in one of these center of excellence? What are the deliverables that are required? And as Bert said, whether you use a hybrid model, a centralized model, or distributed, you're going to have to find a way to get this work done and these decisions made. The first is platforms. As we said a moment ago, what is the technology platform you're going to use? And although we referenced UiPath, it's important to note that as you go through that series of steps, that journey, you'll find yourself in new territory with new technologies that might require you to look at different platforms. From a standard standpoint, as we already mentioned, it's important to know, not only from a security standpoint, but for example, from an HR standpoint, how bots are going to operate. Does everybody know that if you're going to do RPA, you most likely are going to have to go to HR and ask for an employee ID for robot? Raise your hand if you knew that. Raise your hand if that was new information to you. So this is about taking the headset of technology off and putting the headset of human resource or workforce management on. That's a new way for us to think about the robot explosion that's happening now. Bot production, we talked about that a moment ago. You have to actually put in place demand management and capacity management to do this effectively. Because if you can get everybody excited about RPA, the next thing that happens, you actually have to deliver the capability. So this includes at Equifax using internal resources, using certified third parties who are implementers, and also looking at internal capabilities. As well as Bert's team manages a very large set of resources that are third-party outsourced services supplying Equifax, and a lot of good innovation around automation happens there too. So managing vendors is a very big part of the competency requirements of a COE. Research and development, you've got to keep your thinking hat on to say what happens next. We're only really 2 years into this RPA journey at Equifax, and we're already looking at how to make sure machine learning, data science, and AI are beginning to be embedded in our roadmap. And that includes how to leverage things like chatbots now, and what use cases are most practical to take, if you will, large amounts of service and turn it over to a digital channel. Finally, training and change management. Last week in Costa Rica, San Jose, where this service center is located, we had 13 folks who represented people who represented different areas: finance, security, operations, call center, and what were they all doing there? They could have been team leads yesterday, but today they're automation champions. So they're looking at how can they get the job done to automate more effectively in their groups, and they have to become raving fans of the technology. Instead of thinking about, here comes the robot to automate my team, they're actually sitting there in the room with us, designing what the process looks like once it's automated. And this is the job of the future for those individuals. So that's a big part of the responsibility of the COE to provide that sense of what's the path for individuals in their service center, not just the path for technology. So that means that they have to have, as Bert said, a way to deliver this on a global basis. And that's not just having automation talent in one place in Costa Rica. It's about bringing together people, process, technology in a far-flung empire of responsibilities across Equifax's service delivery channels, which include Australia, the UK, the operations in Costa Rica, as well as in the US. The COE may have the responsibility from a policy standpoint to enable this, and often does some of the production work, but ultimately there needs to be local delivery capacity and understanding how to use the technology in every one of these regional centers. And that means an operating model that's pretty crisp on who does what, when, and why. So on the left-hand side, you have the beginnings of demand management with automation champions working with the COE to say, what's our build plan? What's our forecast for automation? And that would be based on business priorities, not the priority of the shared service center. You then have the Center of Excellence delivering automation there, as well as with third-party partners. And finally, there's a string of enabling folks that have to come along to make this happen. IT, security, HR, the folks from global sourcing and finance, the folks from global process improvement. They've all been part of a steering committee that Bert's on that's played a very major role in making sure this is shaped and evolved. And I think it's fair to say, Bert, if you just want to add a thought here, that the steering committee often has some opinions about how this is supposed to work, and there's never one right answer.
Well, all of our steering committee has their own set of priorities, and they're used to a scenario where you go to IT and ask for stuff, and they say, yeah, we can do automation for you. 2 years, $2 million, and we'll be done. And, you know, RPA is a bit different because you're going in through the user interface, just like a human would do. You don't have to get IT in the middle of it. All they got to do is give you some infrastructure to put your robots. Security tells you how they want it constructed so that it's behind your firewalls, et cetera. And your operations people work with developers to turn the robots on, and you're not utilizing already tasked IT resources. But that probably wasn't exactly where you wanted me to go.
But that was great. But that steering committee is extremely important because they're there to constantly remind us as we go on this journey that guess what? There's business that's being done, there are leadership challenges, and they have to direct us in a vector that's going to result in impact for the regions, which might be different for international, for the US, or for other areas.
Yeah, the different steering committee members kind of embrace the fact that they can, to a certain degree, control where we go next, what our priorities are, what our processes should be, and it's going to be an evolution with them. It's also a learning event, and we may bring on some more and drop some as things change with time, but it is critical to have that leadership structure in place.
Back to you, Bert.
So the Center of Excellence, for me, I think it's critical because you get all your key stakeholders together and you agree on what your strategy is, what your path forward is. You've got buy-in from your C-suite type executives, and not to say that it's a static plan, but it gives you a plan. You know, I heard somebody speaking earlier this morning about Wild West, and without some kind of strategy and boundaries, you'll end up with folks doing stuff everywhere, and you're going to suboptimize what you're trying to do as well. You're going to have some problems. RPA definitely works, but you need to do it in a controlled fashion or you're going to have failures. And failures are okay. It's definitely something you utilize the agile technology, you know, learn fast and move on. But learning from those mistakes, capturing those learnings, having a library of best practices, as well as a centralized strategy is key. At least it was for us. So.
And if I could just add, I think one of the things that we found working with Equifax is that, like any large organization, just a quick show of hands, who's here from a relatively large and complex company? Anybody? Okay. How hard is it to basically herd the cats to get them aligned on what you would call something called a strategy? Is that easy or hard? This is the beginning of the interactive part of the afternoon program, team. Is that easy or hard? Hard. Okay. Why is it hard? Yeah, they're thinking while they're working. They've got their own thoughts. Change is hard. What else? Competing agendas. That's the real issue, right? So ultimately, everyone's trying to do the right thing, but they might have a different motivational structure. They have their objectives. They have their mission. They're trying to get that done. So you may have significant alignment issues. And I think one of the things that we have found that's very important to do if you're going to do a global enterprise scale automation initiative is you have to constantly understand the fact that what this particular organization might need or want is not the same as this one. So how do you make sure that happens under this umbrella program that's designed to some extent be the rising tide that raises all ships, but it has to recognize that on that rising tide, people may be headed in a little different direction. And what they need is important. So part of what we've done recently is worked with our steering committee to say, is what we need in the US the same thing as what we need in Europe is the same thing as what we need, for example, in Australia. They might be all at different points in the journey, but they all need that little push that comes, and in some cases it may be they need infrastructure in place because they want to be able to do this on a robust way. In other areas it may be that, guess what? They need to have change managed so that people understand what RPA is for. And finally, there may be folks who actually need help getting the technology proven in their environment. You have to meet them where they are on the journey.
So, you know, another thing to remember, really these programs are all about people. And it takes people. Don't underestimate the need to have your people in place that manage and foster the health of these programs, or you will have challenges for sure. Change management is also critical to make sure that your employees see this as an opportunity, which it is, to learn new skills, take the mundane out of their jobs, and figure out new and better ways of doing things, which, you know, really is exciting. Over the course of this, you know, past couple of years, we have robots in place that will deliver close to $8 million in value. And that was through a time when we had some significant interruptions in focus at Equifax. You know, when your company name is all over the press, it's kind of difficult to have focus. And we're not completely through that event, but coming on the back side of that, knowing that now all of your IT and security resources and new CEO and all of those things are focused on completely redoing everything we have. Not that everything was broken, but making sure that we are in a position of strength and industry leading from a data security standpoint. It means all the more focus is being put on RPA now, because your IT resources are off doing other things. Your P&L's a bit challenged, and we've got a technology that has shown some success, and success breeds success. So all the more reason now that we're kind of getting closer to a business as usual time to focus on automation. We're also looking into the next level of technology, getting more into the front office with, you can still use RPA in the front office, assisted kind of automation, or get into chatbots or virtual agents or all kinds of other machine learning capabilities. There's also other things that you can bolt onto RPA, such as OCR engines, natural language engines to help whatever channel of data that you have to help you figure out how to automate things. So challenging times, but definitely a new thrust towards the possible.
And speaking of the possible, this is what scale looks like. We talk about scaling RPA, and the team has done a remarkable job, and they've done it, as Bert just said, under some difficult circumstances where, you know, this has happened in the last 2 years, but only in the last year they've been able to put in place a global network, a global governance process, automation capabilities both in-house and with third parties, and also we now have champions in the US, in Latin America, in Australia, and in Europe who are all out there on the hunt looking for outstanding opportunities to automate process, as well as business leaders, both who own large chunks of the in-house services of Equifax, but also business leaders who work on the outside with their third parties, speaking the vocabulary of automation on an enterprise level. And that's a really remarkable accomplishment. And I think it's important, since we actually have two of the individuals who have a very, very important role as leaders of the Center of Excellence here in the audience today, that we recognize them. So please, Mr. Luis Ramirez and Mr. Ricardo Alvarado, please stand for a round of applause. That's what success and scale looks like. So to finish up quickly, if you're going to have a digital workforce in the future that we're all excited about, it has to start with transforming the lives of people. So think about where this story started. When Bert said there was this shared service center in Costa Rica that became, interestingly enough, a very important part of, a very important lever in the transformation strategy of this large global company. Many of us in this room have worked with, either on the outsourcing provider side, or on the sourcing advisory side, or on the customer side of third-party services, or in-house captive organizations. And ultimately, we know that model has always been, historically, about labor arbitrage, finding a way to get high-quality talent in a lower-cost location. But here comes this wave called digital transformation. And there's this question that the folks faced in Costa Rica, in this shared service center, which is that wave going to go over them, or are they going to be able to get on top of it and surf to the next level? And the good news is, as was pointed out in La Nación, which is a nationally recognized newspaper in Costa Rica, just this past week, this story was published. And just a quick show of hands. Anybody here not be able to speak Spanish? Anybody here English first language speaker, or Hindi maybe? Other languages? So I'll translate for you. The story is, now people are part of that digital transformation. They are making it happen. The digital workforce isn't something that's happening to them. It's something they're making happen, going from transaction, mid-office, back-office kinds of roles, front-office roles, to being right there in the heart of automating their own processes. It's truly a remarkable story, and we're very appreciative and proud to be able to share it with you today. Thank you.
Thank you.